Welcome, guys, to Media's live show, episode 18. I got the camera on because we got something serious to talk about. Uh, well, a lot of this is it. This is where I'm gonna have to talk a lot about One Piece, which is a subject I could actually talk about for hours if left unabated. Obviously, I have the Straw Hat Pirate flag and my background. It's been there ever since I moved into this house, and it was I believe hanging from my door in my last apartment. Anyway, before we actually jump into that, uh, we're having a little bit of a later start today because I went to the zoo. Um, More on that at a later date. Because I have a bunch of pictures, but a lot of it's references for something I'm going to be doing in October for the live show. I will be doing it live, possibly live. I'm not sure. I'm not actually sure how that live show is going to go, but it'll be the live show for October 21st. Anyway, for that we have a one thing to do on the weekly roundup, and that is the season finale of Rascal Does Not Dream of Santa Claus. It's not fully resolved, and I know that they're going to do one last movie that's going to adapt the final two light novels. I believe it's Rascal Does Not Dream of His Girlfriend and Rascal Does Not Dream of a Dear Friend. I don't remember which order those are in. Um, like I said, I haven't actually read the light novels. I've just read ahead on the titles. Uh, I really like the way that this resolved. I like that it kind of implies that Nene did not actually lose sight of herself. She was trying to forget herself and forsake herself because the person she loved the most had forgotten about her. Uh, but thanks to Sakata, he was able to remember, and I really like their relationship, even though we don't really see the relationship itself, because it's very clearly like, what if Sakata took a lot longer to remember Mai, or what if Sakata and Mai had been dating for a long time and then Mai went through her puberty syndrome and Sakata forgot about her, uh, which puts even more stress on Nene and her kind of anger at Mai because why does Mai have everything that I don't? How come Mai's boyfriend was able to remember and mine wasn't? And then the reveal that she's not even the original Toko Kirishima, which I think they actually suggested in the penultimate episode. So that's actually still a lingering plot thread because it turns out that everyone who has tried to cover this like specific song has turned into like a Toko Kirishima. She's not the first. In fact, she's just the latest in a very, very long line of Toko Kirishimas who fell in love with that song, covered the song, disappeared from people's consciousness, lost sight of themselves, and then eventually disappeared fully, only to be replaced by another Toko Kirishima. But the cycle is going to end here. I'm guessing. I'm looking forward to the movie. I'll talk about that whenever the movie comes out. I'll watch it as soon as I can. It could take a year after it comes out. I know that um, so it's a little more iffy on the release of these movies, or at least it was for the prior three. So yeah, I think it was a very strong conclusion to a very strong arc. I ended up liking all the characters. I ended up liking how it involved some of the secondary characters, like the Nightingale girl. I can't ever remember her name, but the one that had that kept on switching places with the version of herself from the other timeline. Uh, I like how it incorporated her. I like how it incorporated Mai. Obviously, I think Mai gets kind of slept on in some of these arcs. Um, but that's enough of that. I do give Rascal Does Not Dream of Santa Claus like an 8 out of 10. Like, it's not anything super special, but it is. I think it might actually be more solid than Bunny Girl Senpai because of the Toko Kirishima situation serving as a much tighter narrative through line for the entire season. Whereas Bunny Girl Senpai in the movies didn't really have that. Like, it had Shoko, kinda, but not really. And then the whole Shoko situation had to get resolved in the movie, which I guess the Toko Kirishima stuff has to get resolved in the movie, too. So, kind of verdict still out on that, I guess. Uh, all right, I'll be right back. One more bit of housekeeping. Hopefully this weekend, I will have the longest podcast ever finished. Longest thing I've ever had on my channel. It's going to be over 5 hours long, and it's going to be a blast. I'm looking forward to everyone here seeing it. All right, time for the camera to be back on. Time to get serious. Is One Piece political? The answer to that is not as easy as a lot of people would have you believe, because when most people say political, what they actually mean is propaganda. And when most people say like it's not political or anti-political or apolitical, they don't mean that it is completely divorced from politics. They mean that it's not propaganda. I would argue that there's only one arc in all of One Piece that is truly propaganda, or not truly propaganda, but truly political. Truly, not in the propaganda sense. And that's Wano. Because Wano is the only one that deals with an actual issue that has actual meaning to the actual people who are actually reading One Piece. I do have notes here, so we'll just go step by step. There's the whole thing with like culture being downstream from politics, or is it politics being downstream from culture? Basically, like, we all live in cultures, and cultures are somewhat defined by the political structures, and the political structures are then in a cyclical nature based on the culture. So it's this infinite feedback loop. And this is especially true in democracies and republics and other like representative forms of government, where the people actually have a say in how the government is being run. So that this is doubly true of that. And just to kind of show how this happens and how this affects media, I have kind of like two like counter examples here. Not really examples, but like anecdotes. In the 70s, there was a lot of censorship on television. Not so much in Hollywood, but on television. Because something that Nixon, Ford, and Carter agreed on was that children should be sheltered from challenging situations. They had a similar viewpoint on that. And of course, Carter took it way further than Nixon did, and Ford didn't really take it in any real direction. He wasn't president long enough to make any kind of headway one way or the other. But this is why shows. Let's Scooby-Doo. I'll use the example of Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo is actually a really good example to use here, because we've had a version of Scooby-Doo in every single decade since the 60s. 60s Scooby-Doo is a lot more hardcore than 70s Scooby-Doo. 60s Scooby-Doo was allowed to actually show like skeletons and grime, and like they'd be in swamps in some episodes, and it'd be like gritty, and there'd be like threats of murder. Obviously, no one died in Scooby-Doo. It's a kid show. And even in the 60s, like there were always some form of censorship guidelines to protect children from that kind of material. But in the 70s Scooby-Doo, it's all like pastel colors. It's all daytime and bright, and the monsters are a lot more cartoony looking. They're not nearly as scary. You get like Shark Man and the guy with like the iron face and the electric ghost. Those were all like 70s villains. You had the pterodactyl ghost in the 70s, whereas 60s you had like the Creeper, the Black Knight who had an actual legit weapon, Captain Cutler who was like supposedly the soul of a man who drowned at sea. Like legit cool ghost story stuff happening in 60s Scooby Doo. And then kind of like cartoony nonsense in 70s Scooby Doo. Scooby Doo's all nonsense, but it was better in the 60s. Um, then in the 80s, Ronald Reagan became president and he rolled back a lot of those censorship guidelines and opened up the economy to more foreign influences, especially Japan. And also made it law or signed it into law, or really got rid of the laws that were preventing this, kind of like an anti law, to where companies could now directly market to children, something they weren't really able to do in the 60s and 70s. And it's because of that that all these toy companies started being like, oh, we're going to fund our animation studios, we're going to fund all these cartoons, and we're going to use those cartoons to basically be 20-minute long commercials with commercial breaks to sell even more toys in between. This is how we got Transformers and G.I. Joe and My Little Pony and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Thundercats and He-Man, Masters of the Universe. We got all these shows in the 80s because Reagan made it possible for toy companies to market directly to children using television and using TV shows. Sup, GQ Smith? I see you in the chat. Uh, so all those shows, GI Joe does have like some overlap with politics because it is about the army effectively, but it's also not, and we'll get into why it's not really. In a later bit, at a later note point I have on this doc, but all those shows are or were influenced by the politics of the time, and we see that still to this day. Where who's in charge? It's the coastal elite liberal. Blah 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 blah. That's why we get shows like Steven Universe and Adventure Time and Gravity Falls and Star Wars: Forces of Evil, and now it's like even adult animation with like Hazbin Hotel and what's the new one? Knights of Guinevere is the new one. Haven't seen it. Can't judge it, but I did see the one scene. It sucked. Um, so there is a difference because there's really three things that are getting conflated here online and in online spaces that are really three different beasts entirely. There's being influenced by politics, which is just being influenced by culture, as all people are, and therefore all art is. But that's not what people are talking about when they're talking about being political. Then there is having politics, but still not really being political, in the sense that people are talking about it today. One of my favorite movies of all time is Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I've talked about it before. I've made at least 2 videos on it in my channel's history, and I might be due for another one at this point. So Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is about politicians, but it strangely does not take sides. It has a very applicable message. It is rooted in truth. But the villains are a bunch of journalists, but also one of the heroes is a journalist as well. One of the main villains is a politician, but the main hero is also a politician. It strangely doesn't take sides. The state that Jefferson Smith and Senator Payne represent is not named. It is stated to be a Midwestern state, but that narrows it down from 50 to about 7. And then there's some overlap with like some things that had happened before the movie came out with Illinois and Missouri, so it's probably supposed to be like one of those two states. I've always thought it kind of weird that Claude Rains' character of Senator Payne looks suspiciously like at then Senator, but future President Harry Truman, senator from Missouri, who later became president in the 40s. Uh, but then there's also a lot of similarities between Taylor, the main antagonist of the film, and a guy by the name of Boss Tweed, who I believe was Illinois. Fact check. He was. He was New York. William M. Tweed, also known as Boss Tweed, was an American politician and most notable for being the political boss of Tammany Hall, the Democratic Party's political machine that played a major role in the politics of 19th century New York City and state. Read that right off the wiki. Uh, and then when you look into the people who made Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, you do find out that they were all Republicans. Frank Capra was a Republican. His family had actually left Italy to get away from the Socialist Party that was kind of taking over at that time. At that time being like, 1910s, 1920s, before, 10, 15 years before Mr. Smith Goes to Washington was made. But James Stewart was Republican. A lot of these other people were Republicans at the time. They were heavily critical of Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was president at the time. Uh, and another bit of a weird overlap here is that the bill that becomes the topic of conversation in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is very similar to FDR's New Deal, where basically Senator Smith, Jefferson Smith, played by James Stewart, he wants to get government funding for a boys' camp, Boy Scouts. And then he finds out that the land he wants to use is being sold to the government as part of Senator Payne's bill, which is to create, I believe it's a hydroelectric dam or something like that, which is exactly what happened in Tennessee during FDR's administration, Land Between the Lakes, where FDR basically signed a bill to build a giant dam in Tennessee that created a massive hydroelectric dam that supplied power to the South. It's the whole thing. It was part of the New Deal. And then that Smith kind of starts to get suspicious. He's like, I wasn't aware of this land being sold. I know the guy who owns it. He knows nothing about it. This is all kind of seeming really fishy. Turns out that it's all the machinations of James Taylor, who is basically selling Willet Creek Dam to himself in order to line his own pocket with this government-backed bill. Uh, TB said they don't care that it's political. Political violence is not where the line is drawn. Everything that has happened this month proves that it's rules for thee and not for me. We'll get to that. We'll get to some of that. Because there's a lot of disingenuousness going on. There's a lot of hypocritical actions here, and a lot of the hypocritical actions is coming from the right, but it's being done in a very "I told you so" or "I warned you" sort of way, and I've been on championing that. I've been banging that drum for as long as I've been on the internet. For those of you who don't know, which is probably most of you, because I've only mentioned like twice in the whole history of my channel. Before YouTube, before fanfiction, before anything, I did have a Twitter account, and it was for local politics. Like all the people I followed at the time were my governor, my senators, my reps, county alderman, mayor, all that stuff. Like I was involved in local politics. No, not like super active. Like if you asked them about me, they wouldn't know. But like I made, I marched in parades. I banged my drum about wildlife conservation. I've donated to the WWF. I raised back when I was a kid, I was raising money for like Hurricane Katrina and stuff. When I was 12 years old. So I've always been kind of involved in what's going on in my town. That's one of the big reasons why I like to go to the zoo at least once a year. And when I go to the zoo, I don't just take a free ride, I donate. I spend money. I spent a lot of money today. The St. Louis Zoo is free. I dropped probably $50 between the adventure pass, feeding the giraffes, uh, taking the train, doing the stingrays, having lunch, getting snacks, getting water for myself. I spent like $6 on a recyclable bottle of water because I deeply care about the environment. I deeply care about animals, and I will do whatever is within my power to fund conservation efforts here and abroad. That is one of the very few things that I am actively passionate about, like off camera and stuff. I just don't get very many opportunities to talk about it on my channel because my channel was built around like talking about fucking Ruby and anime and bullshit. Uh, but yes, if you have the opportunity to patron your local zoo, look into it a little bit first and see like what they're doing to help conservation efforts, and if they are doing legit work for conservation efforts, go and spend money. I highly encourage that. Um, anyway, back to Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. So there is a strategic reason why Mr. Smith Goes to Washington doesn't name drop any real people. It doesn't name drop any of the real political parties. It doesn't name drop any of the real states. And it's because doing so would be propaganda. Politics becomes propaganda when you are dehumanizing or being disingenuous about an opposing political viewpoint or even your own viewpoint. There's a lot of. I just talked about the environment, how much I'm big on conservation and zoology and protecting endangered species. So a big thing with that is climate change. I believe climate change is inevitable. Is the best way to put it. I believe it's happening. I believe that human impact on climate change is something we'll never really know because we didn't really start collecting data until after the Industrial Revolution, so we don't have a whole lot of data from before we were pumping all this carbon dioxide into the air on a daily basis. Uh, we don't really have any data from before we had a power grid wholly reliant on burning coal. Uh, so because we don't have any data from that, we can't really measure the true impact that we've had. And in fact, like the correlation doesn't actually make sense because our overall carbon emissions have gone down over the past 20 years as we've moved towards more alternative fuel sources, more electricity, more hydroelectricity, wind power, solar, etc., and burning more like cleaner versions of coal and also nuclear. Uh, Yet the temperature keeps rising, which is weird. Temperature keeps rising. Average global temperatures, anyway. So it's like even though America has lowered our carbon emissions by a lot, is China actually lowering their how much is China actually raising their carbon emissions? Because they give reports where like, yeah, we've upped it by like 2%, but like, is it really only 2%? Or is it more like 10% and you're just saying it's 2% so that we don't sanction you? I don't trust the Chinese government if you can't tell. I don't trust a single report that comes out of Xi Jinping's party's mouth. Just like the whole like we haven't had a single COVID death thing from 2020. It was like summer 2020 where they were saying like that they hadn't had any deaths related to the pandemic. Like bullshit. Y'all are ground zero. Y'all had the first deaths, and you're trying to convince the world that you had none? What? If you're going to lie, make the lie believable. Holy crap. Uh, but yeah, so politics become propaganda when they pick specific sides, uh, and make it very clear. Modern day Marvel Comics is propaganda. Anything written by Ta-Nehisi Coates is propaganda. Uh, as much as I love Captain America: Secret Empire from the 70s, kind of propaganda. Uh, and it's this sobering thought that I had when I was actually looking into the Nixon administration. Like, wait, that's what Watergate actually was? That's it? Every president since Bush has been doing that, but on crack. That is a drop in the ocean compared to what the Patriot Act did legally. And I'm supposed to be mad at Nixon for maybe not even 100% confirmed, but maybe being involved with wiretapping Democrats who we now know were taking money from the USSR, the Soviet Union. Like, that's why he was wiretapping the Democrats, is because he suspected them of treason and suspected that they were taking money from the Soviet Union. And then in the 90s, when the Berlin Wall fell and the Kremlin files got, a bunch of them got declassified, turns out Nixon was right, as was Joe McCarthy. Every word that Joe McCarthy said was right. And this is where, like, I can't trust this so-called free market when it comes to entertainment, because so much of it is still rooted in the people who let that happen and made billions because of that happening. Throughout the 50s and 60s, rewind even further. Throughout the 30s and 40s, there were successful films being made by people of all political persuasions, even Nazis. By the 50s and 60s, started to wane a little bit. And by the 70s and 80s, good luck finding a film made by a conservative director. And nowadays, conservative directors aren't even allowed to work in Hollywood. And they will claim that it was all, free market. That, like, oh, the liberals are the only ones making good movies. Like, no, you don't get it. Conservative films weren't even getting greenlit unless they were already backed by someone who had a lot of money and influence on their own anyway. The Soviet Union were basically influencing the market and controlling it from Moscow throughout the 70s, 80s, and even into the early 90s. And it worked because a lot of those people, a lot of those studio heads, a lot of those directors and screenwriters and actors are still calling the shots today. But back to One Piece. One Piece is only political in the broadest of sense. It is political in the fact that it is about people who are involved in their world's politics. But One Piece exists in such a fucked up, warped, exaggerated version of reality that just is nothing like what Earth has ever been. And I'll use a very big thing in One Piece as the example. Uh, Slavery. Saying slavery bad has not been an actual political statement for a very long time. Because especially here in the West, we've all kind of collectively agreed that slavery was kind of messed up. And in fact, people here in America have been saying it since the founding of our nation. For those of you who don't know, we damn near lost our shot at independence because of slavery. Because so many people within the founding fathers were adamantly against slavery, including some of the slave owners. Thomas Jefferson wrote many drafts of the Declaration of Independence before the one that got finalized. And in the first several drafts, he condemned the act of slavery. He condemned specifically the East India Trading Company and the transatlantic slave trade. Called it a hideous blot. Said that the institution of slavery is counterintuitive to the idea of personal liberty. That we cannot have a truly free nation so long as we maintain slavery. He likened the colonists to slaves, being like, the British Empire is treating their colonies as if they are not actually citizens and they are actually slaves. And we need to take off all the shackles and start governing ourselves. And Jefferson was not alone in those sentiments. In fact, someone who fought for that idea even harder than Jefferson did was his partner John Adams, who helped him write the Declaration of Independence. John Adams was a staunch abolitionist. He hated slavery. And he fought tooth and nail to keep that part of the Declaration of Independence intact. But the Southerners, particularly South Carolina, Edgar Rutledge, I believe was his name, laid out the fact that slavery is very deeply rooted in global economics, and it was at the time. There's a musical version of all this called 1776. It's really good. Go watch it. There's a song in there called Molasses to Rum. It is Rutledge's song, where he basically outlines how even the people who hated slavery, who never directly participated in the slave trade in their life, who detested it from beginning to end, even they benefited from slavery. That's how ingrained it was. It had never been done before. An agrarian society, a society of farmers, being able to make a profit without the use of slave labor had never happened before. We needed technology to outmode slavery. And I would argue that maintaining slavery to the degree that we did actually held our country back, technologically speaking, because getting rid of slavery, abolishing slavery, forced our best and brightest to think of ways to make up for the loss of free labor, which is how we got things like the cotton gin and tractors. We wouldn't have tractors if we were still just using slavery. We wouldn't have had an industrial revolution. If we got rid of slaves earlier, we could have had an industrial revolution 20 years earlier. All the pieces were there. Technologically speaking, all the pieces were there for an industrial revolution as early as the 1840s. We just didn't get it until the 1880s because so much of what could have benefited from those technological advances didn't have the stressors to encourage that kind of innovation. And it was all because of slavery. But you might be asking yourself, if Jefferson was against slavery, why did he directly participate in it? Well, on top of Thomas Jefferson being the biggest hypocrite in American politics at the time and of all time, Virginia law actually forbade him from selling his slaves or getting rid of his slaves. And this is not something that is taught in history classes very often. It was, at the time, Virginia law that if you were in debt, you could not just sell your property. Thomas Jefferson had slaves in his house, but he didn't technically own them. Technically, Thomas Jefferson did not own a damn thing in his life. Thomas Jefferson did not even own the shoes on his feet. He was so far in debt. Everything was owned by the state or Commonwealth of Virginia. And the same thing with George Washington. George Washington could not just get rid of his slaves. There's a whole lot of paperwork, and it was a whole hassle. Slave traders made it really, really difficult to legally get rid of slaves. And you can't just like take a key, undo their chains, and tell them go run with the wind, because then slave catchers would capture them and just sell them right back into slavery. In fact, I live in Missouri. Dred Scott, the Dred Scott court decision, initially happened here in St. Louis in the old courthouse that's downtown right next to the arch. And then got taken to the Supreme Court. Dred Scott was a guy who was a slave who got freed by his master, but his master didn't do all the paperwork required to legally free him, so he got fined a lot of money, and Dred Scott got put right back into the slave trade. He got put right back into chains, all because we had a horrible system to do that, and the courts really messed it up on that one. Um, but slavery in One Piece is so much more cartoonish. Like, right now in the manga, we're looking at the God Valley flashback, and uh, as messed up as America has been, as messed up as the world has been, especially when it comes to owning people, uh, we never went to another country, rounded up their entire population, painted targets on their back, and then hunted them for sport. No country has ever done that. No, when Europeans committed genocide, we did it by complete accident. That's hilarious. It's not. I'm joking about the joke, but it is a fact that the large chunk of the Native American genocide that did happen was done basically by accident. We had no idea that smallpox was going to be a problem. We didn't even have germ theory back then. We didn't even know that germs existed at the time of Christopher Columbus. And smallpox like wiped out 70% of the Native American population basically overnight, within a few decades. We had no idea what we were doing. So much of human what we would consider like human evils happened not out of maliciousness, but out of sheer ignorance of how the world actually works. Uh, but one thing I kind of want to point out, and I have it in my notes here, is that in One Piece, slaves have no rights. In fact, when it comes to the celestial dragons, even kings and nobles do not have rights. Like Saint Charlos, one of the celestial dragons, has the right to capture the literal mermaid princess and put her as a slave wife. He has that authority, and there isn't a thing that King Neptune and the other people can legally do to stop him. And then the only person with the authority to stop him, other celestial dragons, Saint Mjosgard, the goat, the only good celestial dragon that we've met. He stepped in, got stopped Charlos, and he got killed for it. Like, you are not even allowed to be a good celestial dragon, because if you have any bit of humanity, if you have any bit of respect for other people, you will get executed. Again, not something with any real world equivalent. Because in reality, slaves did have, and I have in big air quotes, some rights. Rights also in air quotes, or rights should also be in air quotes. Especially in ancient times, like people will try to dunk on the Bible because it can condone slavery, but like doesn't really. It condones slavery as a punitive measure, and you know who else does? Modern day Californians. I think it was earlier this year. It was either this year, or last year during election season, where California voted to maintain prison labor. What is prison labor if not punitive slavery? It's the exact same thing, serves the exact same purpose, logistically works the exact same way. Punitive slavery still exists in America. It exists in the most liberal state in America. They just voted for it again. Well, when you commit a felony, you basically give up your rights. You basically said, my rights are worth the risk for doing this crime. Uh, and then it's not. It's kind of my penultimate point here. A lot of people will say that One Piece is political, and then they'll just go the most milk. They're like, oh, it has slavery, and it has revolutions, and it has wars, and it has like corrupt people in power. So it's political. Like, but that's not what you mean, is it? Because that's not what people who think that one who believe correctly that One Piece is pure escapism. One Piece is escapism because at the end of all that, there is still hope. There are still the drums of liberation. There is the new dawn that is coming. Luffy is the one who is going to change the world for the better. You have people like Kuma and Dragon who are still putting in the work to try to like protect people. You have people like Garp who understand how horrible the system is, but are still like fighting with all their strength to just protect the people that are right in front of them. Uh, and to prove this, I'm just going to point out the fact that there isn't a single democracy in One Piece. As far as we know, there isn't a single island that is run democratically. They're all monarchies or feudalism. You know, Wano it has a feudal lord system, which is basically just Asian monarchy, not monarchy. Uh, and every time Luffy goes and overthrows the government of one of these islands, he replaces it with the exact same form of government. Alabasta maintained its kingdom. Luffy actually by defeating Crocodile, he actually took out the guy who was stoking the fires of revolution for his own personal gain. Same thing with Fishman Island, where he took out the insurgents. Hody Jones was the insurgent in that situation. Neptune and Shirahoshi and the brothers, they were the people in charge. They were the powers that be in Fishman Island for, decades and whatnot. And Luffy sided with them during the whole Fishman Civil War situation. Drum Kingdom went from being ruled by King Wapol to King Dalton. Dressrosa went from being ruled by King Don Quixote do Flamingo to being ruled once again by King Riku. I think his name was like Dolo. It's either Dolo or Doldo or Tolo. It's something like that. The Riku dynasty that had ruled for 800 years previously. Same thing with Wano. He helped destroy Kaido, who was backing Orochi. Orochi died in that same raid and was then replaced by another feudal lord, Kozuki Momonosuke, from the Kozuki line that had ruled Wano before Orochi did. So Luffy goes around replacing all these monarchies with other monarchies, and I'm supposed to believe that he's some kind of power to the people communist? What? Mugi Mookie is a YouTuber who is very funny. His videos are peak comedic commentary on One Piece and other shows. He has no fucking idea what he's talking about when people talk about how One Piece isn't actually political. He has no idea what their actual arguments are, and that is a big problem with a lot of leftists. Because in my experience, a lot of conservatives at least know what the liberal talking points are. They at least know about climate change. They know about gender studies programs. They know about transgenderism. They know what abortion is. I have very rarely met a liberal who actually knows what it is conservatives actually believe. I've yet to meet one of these Reddit atheists. Like, I've met plenty of atheists who know the Bible back and front and know everything that Christians believe in, and even know even more about church history and Christian history than most Christians do. I've met atheists like that. But these like Reddit brand atheists, they don't even know the beginnings of it. There's actually a viral post on Twitter right now where it's like, as a Christian, I don't believe in, or as a Christian, God would hate you, in the lowercase God. And someone posted like the Inglourious Bastards 3 meme. And then it literally went to that person's post and or profile and found a post where they're like, I don't even believe in God. Like, oh, so you were just lying about being a Christian for like brownie points and it didn't even work because you got the fucking grammar wrong. Any self-respecting Christian capitalizes God when talking about God the Father or God the Creator. One Piece is on break this week. I guess this is a better time to talk about it then. Yeah, I did hear that Oda was feeling sick. I thought we were already on a break this coming week. I thought they had a. Was it last week we had the scheduled break, and he's just taking another week off. I don't know. GMH said, hello, it is political, it is anarcho-monarchist. No, so the truth is that Luffy does not give a shit. I've said this time and time again that, like, if you ascribe a political ideology onto Luffy, you do not understand Luffy. And this is the big final talking point I have on my notes, which is that propaganda believes in systemic problems. One Piece doesn't. The world government is not systemically corrupt. It is corrupt because the same fucking asshole who founded the world government and made himself out to be a god king is still the fucking god king. Emu is still around. Emu has been around for at least 800 years, maybe even longer. We don't know. We don't really know his backstory or what the relationship between Emu and Mu is, or the serpent god that was in the Harley text, or whatever, the god of the earth who cultivated his demons or her demons. I believe Emu is a she because most earth gods are female. It's just a thing in mythology. But that is why the world government, you get rid of Emu and the elders and the people that think like him, you can have the world government function effectively identical to how it is now, just better. Same thing with how Dressrosa. Like, Dressrosa's political landscape didn't really change. They just got rid of Doflamingo and all his fuck-ass followers. And got rid of his toy slaves. That's the only difference. That was the only difference when Doflamingo took over. When Doflamingo took over, he didn't, like, reform how Dressrosa was technically run. He didn't, like, usher in tax breaks or whatever. He just took over Riku's infrastructure and added in his own slaves and his own underground dealings as Joker. That's all he really did. Um, Propaganda villainizes and demonizes systemic issues, whereas escapism always puts responsibility on the individual. The various kings and queens, even most of the celestial dragons, are not actually at fault because they are kind of raised the way they are. And they don't really know anything about what life is like at the surface level. And that's actually Don Quixote homing, Doflamingo's father. He was just like, "Hey, I'm kind of curious how all these peasants live. I'm gonna revoke my title as a celestial dragon. I'm gonna buy a house on the sea and live amongst the regular people." He had no idea how much people hated the celestial dragons. He had no idea that they would come after his wife and kids the way they did. If he did, he probably would have stayed up in Mary Joie. And then Doflamingo would be one of the Holy Knights. Most likely. That's just a thing. No, he had no idea. During Vegapunk's message, when Vegapunk mentions the Void Century, one of the celestial dragons that we saw in Sabaody is like, Void Century, the fuck is he talking about? What? Like, oh, you're oblivious. You have no idea. You have no idea that your whole lifeline, your whole way of life is being held up by all these people who are slaves and being enforced by these Marines who have to like stay in line or risk getting their heads blown off by the literal demons running the world. Like, the fear keeps a lot of these people in line. Even people as powerful as Garp don't wage war against Emu and the Gorosei because they know what they're capable of. Like, I'm looking forward to that. Like, I am looking forward to Emu showing up on God Valley and being the one to kill Roxy Zebek, David E. Zebek. That's been my theory ever since Gunko showed up on God Valley. Is that, oh, I wonder if, like, ever since Gunko showed up, I was like, oh, I don't think Garp or Roger were the ones to kill Zebek. I think it was Emu, and then Emu gave credit to Garp. And whatever it is Emu did, or whatever it is Garp saw, is what's kept him a Marine man this whole time, and why he's done the things he's done. That's my theory, though. We won't know for a few more weeks apparently as Oda's health recovers. JQ Smith, I don't think Oda meant Luffy to be a political role model. No, absolutely not. Like, Luffy is the guy who will actively sleep through people's backstory or just wander off when someone is explaining the politics behind the situation. He gives no fucks. GMH said, I think that the discussion can be boiled down as people that say everything is political meant that there is nothing they can't reinterpret to support their own beliefs. Exactly. This is the insidiousness. This is this is kind of the point I have throughout this whole thing, is that people, particularly people on the left, people on the right do it too, but they don't have as much power when it comes to like Hollywood, comic books, manga, anime, anything like that. Conservatives just straight up don't have as much influence because of all the stuff I said before about the KGB funding, all the propaganda stuff throughout the latter half of the 20th century, which influences the way things are still made to this day. They know that when someone is saying One Piece isn't political, they know what they are talking about. They know that they mean that One Piece isn't propaganda, or that One Piece doesn't really pick a side, or that One Piece doesn't really offer any solutions that would be valid in the real world because the conflicts are not valid to what it's like in the real world. It's just a way for these fake ass intellectuals to try to bully people into their belief system. Like, I saw an anime YouTuber be like, I don't know how you could watch One Piece and be conservative. I love One Piece and I'm conservative. Fuck you, I exist. Uh, I've seen, Mugi's another one, where he's like, I'm not gonna argue about with people who say that One Piece isn't political. Like, but actually, you might not because you're a comedy tuber, but you should know that that is not what people mean when they are saying One Piece isn't political. Because as I said in my very first One Piece video, back in 2018, I think it was now, no, 7 years ago when I first caught up with One Piece, that I made an error. I said that Luffy's a libertarian. I said that Luffy's whole ideals is very libertarian coded, and I was corrected. I can't remember if it was in the comments on that video or if it was in a DM later, or if it was just in conversation at a later date. But I was wrong when I said that, because I was kind of like using my own enjoyment of the series and the belief systems that I have in order to influence my interpretation of One Piece, and I was wrong for it. The truth is, Luffy doesn't care. It is very anti-authoritarianism, but that doesn't necessarily mean libertarianism. Because One Piece puts power to the individual. The only difference between Kozuki Oden and Kurozumi Orochi is that Kozuki Oden is a decent dude and Orochi is a piece of shit. That's the only difference. The only difference between Doflamingo and Riku is that Riku is a good guy and Doflamingo is fucking evil. The only difference between just two random people who are kind of two sides of the same coin. The only real difference between Dragon, as far as we know, and Garling, as far as we know, is that Dragon has people's best interests at heart, and Garling is the biggest piece of shit in the series. That's the difference. Dragon has made it a vocal point, and the revolutionaries have made it a vocal point to be like, we're not at war with the random ass kings and queens of these different nations. That's not who our beef is with. Our beef is with just the celestial dragons and the holy knights that support them. And the Gorosei that run things. And now they know about Imu too, so they know that there's an even bigger bad above the Gorosei. But it is just another cudgel, which is the same as the whole like illiterate media literacy people, where like, oh, everything is up for interpretation, everything has a deeper meaning, but oh no, can't interpret it in a way I don't like. Oh, how can you be a One Piece fan and be conservative? I don't know. I am. Like, I don't need to explain my existence to you. Like, how can you watch Starship Troopers and not see that it's anti-fascist propaganda because it made the fascists look cool? And this is kind of a tangent. It's not related to One Piece or anything that I'm talking about today. But like, I saw apparently I have no intention on ever watching Peacemaker. One, I'm just done with DC. Fuck them. Two, John Cena is on my shit list of people that I will never watch ever. Because he cucked out to the Chinese Communist Party when they were screwing over Hong Kong, and John Cena did damage control for them, so he's forever in my bad graces. And three, it just looks shit. But apparently they entered like an alternate Earth where the Nazis won, and it just brings up a point I made on Twitter a while back where like the problem with every single story about like what if the Nazis won World War II is that it portends that the Nazis had like an actually good economic system. It portends that the Nazis were not doomed to collapse eventually. The Nazis were already straining themselves by the time they invaded Russia. That was why they invaded Russia. Nazi Germany ran by Hitler, and Soviet Union Russia, ran by Stalin, they were allies at the start of World War II. And then Hitler was bleeding his country dry of resources, draining it, and being forced to keep invading all these other countries in order to take their resources. And eventually he ran out of his weaker neighbors, had to go do the same to Poland. And eventually he ran out of resources there too, so he had to attack Russia and break his treaty with Stalin. The Nazis, by the time when the Nazis started losing ground, they were in free fall. They were not able to ever gain ground back. As soon as they lost an inch, they lost everything. Because the Nazis were fucking stupid. Their entire economic system is garbage. Their entire political structure is horrible. And it's those economic systems, those political structures that allowed for all the reasons we actually hate Nazis. Like, the terrible thing about the Nazis isn't that they executed a bunch of Jews. The terror of the Nazis is that they had the power to execute a bunch of Jews. That's what made them horrible. And it was these horrible economic policies that allowed them to do that. And they were doomed to fail eventually. If they didn't collapse trying to crack Britain, they would have collapsed trying to crack North Africa. If they didn't collapse trying to crack North Africa, they would have collapsed trying to crack America. The world is too big. And the Nazis were too stupid to run it. And that is the problem. I think it's actually very dangerous to try to portray the Nazis as victorious and consistent and powerful like this. They weren't, really. They were a paper tiger, a Fabergé egg, just watching the clock until they cracked. Because what it ends up doing is it ends up making the Nazis look cool. When you have these things like Peacemaker or I think it's like a Man on the High Castle or Wolfenstein, where like, oh, all the streets are clean and it's like utopic and the economy's good and everyone's got good, decent paying jobs and nice houses. Like, oh, you mean all we have to do to get that is be a little racist? That's a small price to pay. That's what you're telling people when you make these types of shows. You're not making the Nazis look evil, you're making everyone else look stupid. No, you want the Nazis to look evil? Fucking. Again, like, we don't know the political structure of the empire. We don't know, like, what their policies are or if it had any overlap with the Nazis or fascism or whatnot. But Star Wars does a good job at showing, like, life in the Empire just fucking sucks. It just sucks for everyone. It sucks for the people on the Outer Rim. Andor does. I haven't actually watched Andor. I was talking about this with dude a while back. Where like Andor apparently like does it right. Where like no matter where you go, it just kind of sucks. Like, oh, it's all rich and prosperous in some areas, but even there, it just kind of sucks. It sucks living in the Empire. It sucks living under the world government. You know, One Piece is another one. One Piece is really good at showing, like, even the best places just, even they just kind of, like, it's not good. It's not great. Every world government affiliated country has a bunch of poor people. They have places like the Great Border where they just throw all their trash. It sucks. It's gross. It's disgusting. It's inhumane. And it's all done to appease these genetically malnourished, inbred assholes. GQ Smith said, was just about a comment. Wolfenstein lol. Just recently played them. You can replace them with anybody evil and it can work. Well, Wolfenstein kind of. The reason Wolfenstein games do fall into this problem, but gotta kind of remember that Wolfenstein did start as something that took place during World War II. and that's kind of just part of the Wolfenstein identity. So when they tried to like jump on the Modern Warfare bandwagon, they were kind of forced to have that be a plot point. But Wolfenstein is still a good game because even though the story is stupid and it gets the whole like power of the Nazis wrong, whatever, uh, the gameplay's still fun. It's still a really good shooter, or at least the Wolfenstein: The New Order is. I haven't played the last one or two. I think they've made two since then. The last one I played was Wolfenstein: The New Order, and that was pretty fucking good. Pretty good game. Good game. Uh, no, the video games can get away with stupid plots a lot better than movies or TV shows or comics can, because the gameplay will do all the heavy lifting. Uh, but yeah, the whole illiterate media literacy aspect of this situation is that like they don't want people to interpret One Piece. They don't want people to draw their own conclusions. They want people to come to the same conclusion that they did. And that is stupid. Because art will always be filtered through the lens of your own personal experience. Louis Bracona said, "Gameplay is king." Yes. Uh, Literally, my most anticipated game of this year is Jurassic World Evolution 3. None of the other games that have come out this year or are set to come out this year interest me in the slightest compared to that one. And it's because I know it's going to be good. I know it's going to be top. Like I was, should I say it? Should I say it? I told some of my friends this already, and I did mention the date already, October 21st. October 21st, the live show is going to be long because it's going to start at like 9:30 a.m. and it's going to go all day because that is the day that Jurassic World Evolution 3 comes out. And I went to the zoo today in order to take reference photos for enclosures that I plan on building Jurassic World Evolution 3 versions of when that game comes out. And that's going to be a big bulk of that stream. The story of Jurassic World Evolution is ridiculous. It's like all over the place. It doesn't really make sense. It doesn't. It tries to fit in with Jurassic Park continuity, but then it doesn't because like the parks are never successful, but yours is. Uh, but I love those games. I love park builder games. What can I say? And I love Jurassic World Evolution especially. Jurassic World Evolution 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. And Jurassic World Evolution 3 with those new terrain tools. Wow. Frontier is cooking. Frontier is cooking some fine dining for me coming out in October. Super excited. Super excited for it. It is so amazing how much Frontier can cook when they're not forced to meet a movie's deadline. Uh, that was a big problem with Jurassic World Evolution 1 and 2 is that they were made and rushed out to the market in order to come out in conjunction with Fallen Kingdom and Dominion, respectively. Whereas Jurassic World Evolution 3, they were like, hey, you can wait until after Dominion or after Rebirth comes out. You don't have to make the Rebirth release date. They're like, oh, that gives us. Well, you still have a deadline though. You have to come out within a year of Rebirth. Like, okay, give us. That movie came out like what June or July? So July, August, September, October. That gives us 4 extra months of development. Let us cook. They have been cooking. Just revealed Origins of the Mimus earlier today. So excited. So excited. Anyway, sorry. I got lost talking about dinosaurs again. I'm actually going to wrap it up there. Because I think people like Hassan are stupid. I think people like Giga are stupid. I think people like, blanking on his name. It's like Nick something. Guy who said, that that you can't be a One Piece fan and be conservative. I think he's stupid. I think Moogie Goof is stupid. I think they're all stupid. I think they have no idea what people are actually saying when they're saying to stop being political. Because what we mean by that is stop being propaganda. That's what we mean. Thank you all for joining me. Thank you all for supporting the channel again. Support your local zoos. Read One Piece, and don't be a dick.